Hello and welcome to the Formation Tactics series, looking at specific formations in both the attacking and defending phases when up against a differing opposing structure. Brought to you by Elite Football Tactics. In this video, we will look at the 3-5-2 formation in both the attacking and defending phases, specifically when up against a 4-3-3 shape. When both formations are laid out against one another, there is a notable emphasis on the 1 versus 1. The two centre forwards from the 3-5-2 occupy both central defenders in the 4-3-3. Similarly, the front three within the 4-3-3 perfectly match up against the three centre backs from the 3-5-2. In the wide areas, the fullbacks and the wingbacks on each side face off against one another in a further 1 versus 1 situation. In central midfield, there is a 3 versus 3 where teams can either mark and defend zonally or operate with a man-to-man preference, further highlighting the emphasis on 1 versus 1 moments when the 3-5-2 faces a 4-3-3. When building from deep, high positions from both wingbacks in the 3-5-2 can help pin the opposing fullbacks. This creates a 4 versus 4 high up the pitch, which allows for more direct build-up and numbers around any potential second ball. As a result, it's common to see the single pivot in the 4-3-3 drop back, adding extra cover ahead of the 3-5-2's centre-forward pairing. Some teams which utilise a back three will then form a foursome to support around the goalkeeper. The most common method involves one of the wider centre-backs pushing forward, with the two remaining centre-backs filling either side of the goalkeeper. With the wing-backs high, one of the central midfielders can drop out to the wide area, not currently filled by one of the three centre-backs. With two gaps between the 4-3-3's first line of pressure, a double pivot can then be formed, shown here by the 7 and 8. The dropping centre-backs help support play around, with the now double pivot offering passing options to play through. The high front line, or connecting plays in the wide areas, shown here as number 4 and number 11, also allows play over a press. It's common to see the wide centre-back which is pushed forward, here the number 4, to receive under less pressure, compared to the central midfielder moving wide. This is because the number 11's initial marker was the central midfielder in the 4-3-3, so they are much more inclined to press into the wide areas as opposed to when pressing against a forward-moving centre-back. The high wing-backs, still pinning the 4-3-3's full-backs, allows one of the central midfield trio to move and receive into the wide areas, with passes through and over the opposing front line. If the 4-3-3 man mark in the central midfield areas, the inside channel can become open for vertical passes into the front line. However, it is common for the central midfield trio in the 4-3-3 to slide across and cover these passes. Here, the single pivot in the 3-5-2 must constantly offer in the two gaps within the 4-3-3's first line, ideally receiving to play forward. As the single pivot receives the ball, the central midfield and farthest wide player may narrow, covering central passing options, especially into the two centre forwards for the 3-5-2. So working the ball into the farthest wide centre back can then help build around the 4-3-3's block, where the trio of centre forward, attacking midfielder and high wing back can then receive beyond the 4-3-3's central midfield unit. When up against a 4-3-3 which is defending in a lower block, one issue for the 3-5-2 is that the positioning of the central midfielders can cover access into the centre forward pairing, potentially limiting central penetrations. As a result, this means the 4-3-3 central midfield trio can push forward slightly when defending, with the wingers also moving forward, putting earlier pressure onto the three centre-backs. So in order to free up the central spaces, the wing-backs once again push forward, positioned very high towards the opposing full-backs. This again creates space for the central midfielders to move into the wide areas, potentially opening a gap into the centre forwards. Alternatively, one of the centre backs can push forwards, with the closest central midfielder then dropping out and covering for these wide advances, shown here by the 6 and the 11. Should the opposition utilise a man marking scheme in the second line, huge gaps can open up to find the centre forward pairing. However, it is common for the 4-3-3 second line to hold their position, still covering the central spaces for as long as possible. So this opens up the wide areas for the 3-5-2 to exploit, potentially creating a 2 versus 1 against the 4-3-3's fullback. The key for the 3-5-2 here is to progress forward, either cutting back inside or more commonly working around the opposing fullback before the central midfield unit can push across and nullifying any wider overload. The 3-5-2 must then make use of the double centre-forward presence with movements around, across and between the 4-3-3's two centre-backs. When pressing higher, the 3-5-2 often sets up with a focus on man marking and individualised duelling. It is very important for the 3-5-2, but especially those players in the front line, to not get dribbled past and beaten in a 1v1. Otherwise, this will then create overloads elsewhere on the pitch as the 3-5-2 gets pulled apart from their original defensive positioning. Focusing on the 3 versus 3 in central midfield, as the front line presses outwards, the closest central midfielder, demonstrated by the number 7's movements, defends on the outside shoulder. As the ball is worked centrally by the 4-3-3, the rest of the central midfield trio aggressively moves across, covering any central passes. Additional pressure can then come inside from the far wing back or from behind the ball via the front line. With most shorter passing options then covered, the space in behind the back three becomes very important, particularly as the front three in the 4-3-3 are all attacking 1 versus 1 against the 3 centre-backs of the 3-5-2. To deal with these spaces, the alertness and concentration from the goalkeeper is very important, ready to push out and deal with any direct forward passes. The body shape of the back three must also be ready to recover back towards their own goal, especially when there is limited pressure on the opposing ball carrier. From here, they must be able to track forward runs from the opposing trio whilst covering and defending the spaces, moving towards their own goal. When defending in a more reserved block, the 2 wide centre-backs and 2 wing-backs condense, recover and form a back 5. The 2 central midfielders also work back, now alongside the single pivot, forming a much flatter second line. The central forward pairing also drop, as opposing wingers often move inside. With the fullbacks from the 4-3-3 pushing forward, the now 5-3-2 shape focuses on central compactness and forcing the ball around and towards the touchline. As the play is built around, the central midfield trio then slide across towards the ball. An issue, however, with this second line trio is that it is very difficult to cover the entirety of the width of the pitch. The opposition can then switch the play before creating potential 3 versus 2 scenarios against the wing-back and wide centre-back. Alternatively, as the 4-3-3 builds into the wide areas and the 3 central midfielders slide across, the farthest of the 2 centre-forwards can work back, adding a 4th central presence in the second line. This encourages the 4-3-3 to keep the ball on one side of the pitch, where any forward runs can be tracked by the wing-back and closest central midfielder. From here, the play can be locked on one side of the pitch with this adapted defensive shape for the 5-3-2, providing strong cover, support and balance around the ball and a very difficult low block to break down. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe and share, and don't forget to comment any future suggestions for the channel. Please also check out the latest book from the channel titled Football in a Pandemic, looking at the tactics and strategies used in the Premier League during the COVID-19 pandemic.